What if one speech, just one, silently erased a political giant? Here's the shocking fact. In Washington, careers don't usually end with elections. They end with permission. And when the most powerful Republican in the Senate steps to the podium, markets listen, donors move, and power shifts. That's exactly what happened when Mitch McConnell spoke, and almost no one noticed what was really happening. At first glance, it looked like another political feud, another headline, another clip to scroll past. But listen closer and the tone changes. This wasn't anger, this wasn't emotion. It was cold, calculated, and surgical, with carefully chosen words. McConnell didn't attack Donald Trump. He did something far more dangerous. He showed the party how to move on without him. And here's the unsettling question you should be asking. If this speech wasn't meant for voters, then who was it really for? Because what happened next could reshape elections, fracture loyalties, and decide who even gets a chance to run. Stay with me, because once you see the mechanics behind this moment, you can unsee them. If you think Mitch McConnell walked to that podium fueled by anger or frustration, you're already missing the point. McConnell doesn't do public emotion. He doesn't freelance. He doesn't snap. Every word he delivers on the Senate floor is the product of strategy, timing, and long-term calculation. That's why this speech landed so hard. It wasn't reactive. It was pre-planned, pre-written, and waiting for the exact right moment to be deployed. In Washington, speeches like this don't happen unless the speaker already knows where the ground will settle afterward. What made this moment explosive wasn't what McConnell said, it was how he said it. There were no insults, no raised voice, no dramatic flourishes. Instead, he spoke the language of institutions, rules, and consequences. That's deliberate. Emotional attacks fade, institutional arguments stick. By framing his case in procedural and legal terms, McConnell wasn't arguing with the public. He was speaking directly to senators, donors, party lawyers, and power brokers who understand that process is power. This wasn't meant to trend on social media. It was meant to move machinery behind closed doors. And here's the most important part. McConnell would never burn a bridge unless he had already built another road. His entire career has been about preserving Senate authority and winning elections, not protecting personalities. For years, he tolerated chaos because it served a purpose. But this speech signaled something chilling. The cost of staying aligned with Donald Trump now outweighs the benefit. When a man who survives by counting votes decides to go public like this, it means the math has changed. And in politics, once the math changes, everything else follows. In politics, silence is rarely neutral. It's enforced for years. Many Republican senators stayed quiet, not because they agreed with everything, but because speaking out carried consequences. Primary challenges, lost funding, public backlash. What Mitch McConnell did with his speech was quietly dismantle that. Fear, he didn't tell senators what to think. He showed them it was safe to think differently. And that distinction matters. Power in Washington doesn't move when someone attacks. It moves when someone with authority signals that the rules have changed. This is what insiders call a permission structure. Before this moment, criticizing Donald Trump was viewed as political suicide inside the party. After this speech, it became a career option. McConnell didn't demand loyalty to himself. He offered cover by stepping out first and taking the initial blast. He absorbed the danger so others wouldn't have to. That's why the speech wasn't loud or theatrical. It was calm, measured, and deliberate. Because it wasn't aimed at voters, it was aimed at senators watching from their desks, thinking, if he's doing this, maybe I can too, rumors. And once that thought enters the room, everything shifts. The dam doesn't break all at once. It cracks slowly. Senator by senator, some will speak, others will quietly change how they vote. Some will simply stop defending, but the result is the same. Isolation. Political power depends on the belief that you're untouchable. The moment that belief fades, influence collapses fast. McConnell understood that ending a political career doesn't require a dramatic takedown. Sometimes all it takes is one powerful figure standing up and saying, "You are allowed to leave now." One of the smartest, and most dangerous moves Mitch McConnell made was stripping emotion completely out of the equation. He didn't talk about character. He didn't talk about behavior. He didn't talk about loyalty or betrayal. Instead, he anchored everything to law, procedure, and constitutional responsibility. That choice was intentional. Moral arguments divide people. Legal arguments bind them. By shifting the conversation away from feelings and into rules, McConnell transformed a political fight into something that sounded unavoidable, almost mechanical, like the system itself was doing the work. This matters because it gives senators a shield. Voting against Donald Trump becomes easier when you can say, my hands were tied. McConnell wasn't asking his colleagues to reject Trump, the man he was, inviting them to uphold the process. And in Washington, the process is sacred. Senators can survive anger from voters, but they rarely survive accusations that they violated the Constitution. By framing opposition as a matter of duty rather than desire, McConnell created a psychological escape hatch for lawmakers who've been privately uneasy for years. And here's the quiet brilliance of it. This approach changes how voters hear the message too. Instead of a messy, emotional breakup, it sounds like a sober, reluctant decision. That tone lowers resistance. It introduces doubt, not outrage. Once voters start hearing phrases like eligibility, precedent, and constitutional obligation, the story stops being about loyalty and starts being about legitimacy. And legitimacy is everything in politics. McConnell understood that if you want to end someone's dominance, you don't attack their supporters, you give them a reason to reconsider without feeling foolish. And that's what this legal framing accomplished. It didn't demand agreement, it invited acceptance. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this moment is that Mitch McConnell knew exactly what would happen next and chose it anyway. He knew the attacks would be brutal. He knew the insults would get personal. He knew the headlines would scream betrayal. And that was the point. In leadership politics, sometimes the most powerful move is to draw fire on yourself so others don't have to. McConnell didn't stumble into backlash. He positioned himself inside it. That's not weakness, that's strategy. By stepping out first, McConnell absorbed the political shockwave that would have otherwise hit dozens of vulnerable senators. Instead of every Republican facing pressure at once, the anger had a single target, and that target was leadership. This creates breathing room. Senators in swing states can stay quiet. Those in deep red districts can wait. No immediate statements, no forced loyalty tests. McConnell became the buffer zone between the base and the rest of the party. It's a classic leadership move. Take the hit so the structure survives. And it only works if the person taking the hit has enough institutional armor to withstand it. Here's why this is devastating for Donald Trump. Trump's power has always relied on rapid, widespread retaliation, flooding the field with pressure so no one feels safe breaking ranks. McConnell disrupted that dynamic by isolating the conflict. He slowed the momentum. Attacks aimed at one man to destabilize an entire caucus. They concentrate anger instead of multiplying it. And once that anger stops spreading, fear weakens. This is how influence quietly erodes, not through confrontation, but through containment. McConnell didn't try to defeat Trump in a shouting match. He changed the battlefield so the shouting no longer mattered. What most people never see is the quiet side of politics, the side without rallies, chants, or viral clips. While cameras focus on crowds, real power often moves in private dining rooms and closed-door fundraisers. And long before this speech, those rooms were sending a clear signal. Major donors, institutional backers, and long-term strategists were growing uneasy. To them, politics isn't about loyalty or excitement, it's about winning, stability, and return on investment. By the time Mitch McConnell spoke, many of those donors had already begun to step back. This is the pressure that rarely makes headlines. When donors hesitate, campaigns feel it immediately. Advertising slows, recruitment suffers, strategy freezes. McConnell understood that the party couldn't keep moving forward while carrying a figure that donors now saw as a liability instead of an asset. Electoral losses, constant controversy, and unpredictable messaging had made fundraising harder, not easier. So this speech wasn't just political, it was financial. It reassured the people writing the checks that the party was finally willing to course correct. And that's what makes this so damaging for Donald Trump. Grassroots energy can fuel rallies, but it doesn't replace the infrastructure needed to win national elections. Campaigns run on data, legal teams, media buys, and logistics, and all of that costs money. When leadership signals that the money is moving on, candidates notice, consultants notice, and ambition follows resources. McConnell didn't need to convince voters overnight. He only needed to signal to the financial backbone of the party that it was safe to invest elsewhere. Once that happens, political gravity shifts fast, and it rarely shifts back. One of the biggest mistakes people make is thinking power in Washington comes from popularity. It doesn't. It comes from control. Control over money, committees, timing, and opportunity. And this is where Mitch McConnell becomes uniquely dangerous. As Senate leader, he isn't just another voice in the room. He controls the infrastructure that determines which candidates get support and which ones are left to fend for themselves. When someone with that level of authority speaks, it's not commentary, it's a signal to the entire system. McConnell has influence over campaign funding, pipelines, committee assignments, legislative priorities, and the calendar that decides what gets voted on and what quietly dies. Senators understand this, even if voters don't. A single shift in leadership support can mean fewer resources, weaker protection, and reduced relevance. That's why the speech carried so much weight behind closed doors. It told ambitious Republicans that aligning with Donald Trump could now come with structural consequences, not just bad headlines. And in politics, structural disadvantages are far more frightening than public criticism. And here's the key point. Trump's strength has always been cultural and emotional. McConnell's strength is mechanical. Culture inspires, but machinery decides outcomes. You can win crowds and still lose elections if the system stops working in your favor. By speaking out, McConnell wasn't trying to win an argument. He was quietly repositioning the gears of power. Candidates, consultants, and operatives can feel that shift instantly. And once political machinery starts moving in a different direction, it doesn't ask for permission. It just rolls forward, leaving anyone who can adapt standing still while the race continues without them. Timing in politics is never accidental, and Mitch McConnell understands this better than almost anyone alive. If he had delivered this speech too early, it would have been ignored, too late, and it would have been useless. This moment, right before the next political cycle fully locks in, was the sweet spot. Primaries aren't set, donors are still deciding, candidates are still watching for signals. By acting now, McConnell wasn't reacting to events, he was shaping what comes next. And this move was about clearing the runway, as long as Donald Trump dominates the field. No serious alternative can fully emerge. Ambitious Republicans stay frozen. Unwilling to challenge a figure who still commands loyalty, McConnell's speech cracked that paralysis. It told potential candidates, strategists, and operatives that the future was open for competition again. And once that belief takes hold, behind-the-scenes conversations shift quickly from "can we run" to "when do we announce?" Here's why this is so dangerous for Trump. Momentum in politics is partly psychological. If enough insiders believe an era is ending, they begin acting as if it already has. Staffers look for new campaigns, donors hedge their bets, media narratives adjust. Even loyal supporters start asking uncomfortable questions. McConnell didn't need to remove Trump himself. He just needed to start the countdown clock, and once political time starts moving forward without you, catching up becomes nearly impossible. Timing doesn't just influence outcomes, it decides them. At its core, this speech wasn't just about one man, it was about who actually runs Washington. For years, the balance of power tilted toward the presidency, driven by personality, media dominance, and populist energy. What Mitch McConnell did was quietly push back. He reminded everyone, especially his own party, that the Senate is not a supporting actor. It is a co-equal branch with its own authority, traditions, and red lines. This speech was a declaration that the institution was done being dragged behind one individual's orbit. McConnell spoke the language of process, precedent, and constitutional duty for a reason. In the Senate, procedure is power. The way issues are framed determines how votes are justified and remembered. By grounding his argument in institutional responsibility, McConnell wasn't just criticizing Donald Trump, he was reasserting that no former president gets to dominate the legislative branch indefinitely. That's a profound shift. It signals that loyalty to the institution now outweighs loyalty to any single political figure, no matter how influential that figure once was. Why does this matter so much? Because once institutions decide to protect themselves, they tend to be relentless. The Senate has an immune system. It resists anything that threatens its relevance or control. For a long time, it bent because it was convenient. But convenience has a breaking point. McConnell's speech marked that point. It was the Senate saying, enough. And when an institution as old and powerful as the Senate reclaims its authority, individual careers become far more fragile. This wasn't some message to, at its core, this speech wasn't just about one man. It was about who actually runs Washington. For years, the balance of power tilted toward the presidency, driven by personality, media dominance, and populist energy. What Mitch McConnell did was quietly push back. He reminded everyone, especially his own party, that the Senate is not a supporting actor. It is a co-equal branch with its own authority, traditions, and red lines. This speech was a declaration that the institution was done being dragged behind one individual's orbit. McConnell spoke the language of process, precedent, and constitutional duty for a reason. In the Senate, procedure is power. The way issues are framed determines how votes are justified and remembered. By grounding his argument in institutional responsibility, McConnell wasn't just criticizing Donald Trump, he was reasserting that no former president gets to dominate the legislative branch indefinitely. That's a profound shift. It signals that loyalty to the institution now outweighs loyalty to any single political figure, no matter how influential that figure once was. Why does this matter so much? Because once institutions decide to protect themselves, they tend to be relentless. The Senate has an immune system. It resists anything that threatens its relevance or control. For a long time, it bent because it was convenient. But convenience has a breaking point. McConnell's speech marked that point. It was the Senate saying, enough. And when an institution as old and powerful as the Senate reclaims its authority, individual careers become far more fragile. This wasn't some message to, this is where everything comes to a head. With that speech, Mitch McConnell didn't just challenge Donald Trump, he forced the entire Republican Party to choose sides, and that's the most dangerous position Trump has ever been in. His strength has always come from unified emotional loyalty, but a party war isn't won on emotion alone. It's won with infrastructure, money, ballots, and rules. McConnell's move turned a personal dominance into an institutional conflict, and that's a battlefield Trump doesn't fully control. For the first time, the party gatekeepers, Senate leadership, major donors, campaign operatives, and long-term strategists are no longer pretending this tension can be managed. The fragile truce is over. What comes next is fragmentation. Some will stay loyal, others will quietly defect, many will hedge, and history shows that when a political movement fractures, even the loudest figure at its center becomes vulnerable. Energy without structure burns out fast. Structure without unity survives longer than most expect. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. Trump doesn't have to lose his base to lose his future. He just has to lose enough of the system to make winning impossible. McConnell understood that ending a political era doesn't require defeating the leader head on. It requires cutting off the pathways that turn popularity into power, ballot access, funding streams, endorsements, procedural leverage. Once those weaken, momentum stalls. This speech didn't end things overnight, but it started a clock. Trump cannot stop. And when the system decides to move forward without you, shouting from the sidelines doesn't bring it back.